All right, Marcus McCoy of Cunning Forge. Welcome to Grimerica. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This will be a blast. I want to give a shout out to, before I forget, the Noble Savage Forge on Instagram, who said he said you guys gotta have Cunning Forge on the show, and he'd really love it if we had a conversation. So big shout out to him, and this will be fascinating. I was blown away, like sort of watching you in a different interview, and you explaining this alchemical process of blacksmithing, and I mean, I really feel like you're stumbling on some ancient wisdom here. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you about that. We've been reading and narrating old books on ancient wisdom and alchemy and stuff like that. So this will be just great to talk to somebody that's like, working with this stuff.
Sorry, there was a lot of delay there, so you got jumbled up quite a bit, and it was hard for me to understand what you were saying.
Okay. Well,
I hope that's not going to be a problem throughout the whole interview.
I hope not. Yeah. I mean, I won't be talking too much, so hopefully you'll be doing most of the talking.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he
So
doesn't do it when I am too. So,
yeah, where do you want to start? I mean, I'm
yeah,
interested in alchemical blacksmithing. I mean, do you want to get into sort of just jump right into that and then we can go from there?
sure. I mean, we can talk about where that was kind of born, if you'd like.
Yeah.
I'm a student of Robert Bartlett. I don't know if you know him, but the audience needs to know him. He's a lab alchemist, which, in my opinion, if you're not a lab alchemist, you're not an alchemist at all. You aren't actually doing the work. You may think you're doing the work, but you're not one bit. Um, there was never a point in history until now that lab work was somehow disconnected from alchemy. So the people that are doing philosophical alchemy or whatever you want to they want to call it, which
Spiritual alchemy?
sure, I'll yeah, whatever you want to call it these days is seems to be game. You're not doing it. You're not doing the work. And I can say that because I've done lab alchemy and I'm familiar with the philosophy, and I've read books by authors that have maybe done maybe a little bit of the bare minimum of it. But it's just, it's so disconnected and disjointed that they're like absolutely like over the top misunderstanding basic terms and blowing them way out of proportion, and like, I mean, it's hard to.
Can you give us an
I think that
example?
we've gotten into a point like where we did with masonry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
What did you ask? So, like, with masonry, like back in the day, there was a point where masons were literally masons, right? And then they opened their doors to non-masons. As a, from what I understand, I'm not a mason, so people I'm sure can correct me if I'm wrong, but they opened the doors to non-masons politically and socially in order to kind of save their own asses because, you know, uh, those trade organizations were being like headhunted pretty strongly um, in the UK, especially at the time, probably in different places in Europe as well. But I'm speaking from mostly my understanding of the UK. And so trade organizations got attacked pretty heavily. And if you were a member of a secret trade organization, a service society or what have you, like you got sent to the colonies as an indentured servant, and that's a pretty bad deal, being in exile. So they opened up their doors to non-masons and allowed them in, and that sort of symbolism and things sort of got lost to people that weren't actually practicing within the trade. And I would say that a very similar thing happened in traditional witchcraft with the people that were interested in blacksmithing traditions. We see a lot of traditional witchcraft traditions that are focused around blacksmithing that have fuck all to do with blacksmithing, and they don't really understand the processes at all. But the terminology, like you see within alchemy today, and the way that it gets, like exoticized and you know turned into a very esoteric concept, we see a lot of that same thing happen within alchemy. And so you people will talk about sublimation who have never seen the process of sublimation happen in a lab, and they will like just I mean, you're reading this guy, like this philosopher, talk about sublimation in this just like such intense way, with so many layers of depth, that it's just so blown out of context. And when someone has actually sat down and like actually done sublimation in the lab uh, for the purpose of laboratory alchemy, yes, it's spiritual, it's meaningful. There's definitely things that are happening there, but like the it's like a child in the lab that doesn't understand what they're seeing or experiencing, trying to explain it to an adult. And you're the adult who's been in the lab that's been doing this, and you're reading what this child has to say about it, and you're like, that's not that's not that's not what we're doing here. And there's a lot of it's like a naivete. So what I'm experiencing when I read a lot of these things is a certain naivete that comes from people that haven't actually experienced it. And that's a really from someone that hasn't done it, hearing me say it, I'm sure that sounds really arrogant, and it sounds really pompous, um, and insulting to them because I'm comparing them to a child. And I get that. But from a developmental standpoint, when you're a blacksmith and you step into the forge for the first time, and you are trying to learn how to taper and draw, that is a very complex thing for someone that doesn't have any experience. And so they can blow that way out of proportion. They can over complicate it, and they do. Go ahead. You got a
What
question?
is I think if we put our hands up to ask questions, that'll work well. What is
Sure.
sublimation?
Sublimation is where you take a particular material that needs to be you're burning it, you're calcining it, or destructive distilling it.
Distilling it, yeah.
And yeah, but it's like it's different than like say like distilling a liquid, or it's more of like you're distilling a solid through a destructive distillation, and the smoke of that ends up collecting upon glassware, or sometimes metal, or what have you, and sometimes like a big onion shaped device uh, that allows you to collect particularized chemicals that are being released from construction into the outside of the flask, so to speak, that it's being distilled into, right? So it's like instead of distilling liquids where you get the vapor and then the vapor comes over, it's a vapor of a solid thing, not a liquid that then uh, turns into a solid again once it hits that. And so then it becomes like, so a good way to talk about it is like if you're taking say like a an oil lamp, and you turn it up full blast, right? And then you get that black on the the sides of your glass of the lamp, right? We've probably all experienced that, right? we're old enough to have used oil lamps. So that black on the edge of the container, that's like carbon and different chemicals that were within the oil that is in the lamp that's burning off. And then those chemicals are now on the edge of that glass. And so you scrape that off and use that in different alchemical processes. So it's a way of purifying things through a destructive process with fire. So that's one of the ways of describing sublimation.
Can you talk about
Yes.
what when it clicked for you when you were learning from Bartlett about alchemy and blacksmithing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was taking one of my first blacksmithing classes at the same time. I was taking a class from Robert. It was the Secunda class, which is more focused on animal alchemy. So we focus a lot on urine in that class, which is a form of animalia, so to speak. And urine is one of the pathways to making a lot of different things within mineral alchemy. So it's kind of an important step. And that may sound very weird to a lot of people that aren't familiar with lab alchemy, but I'm not going to get into all the details of that. But in it, there's also a lot of talk about like these intermediary processes between plant alchemy and mineral alchemy, because that's kind of what Secunda is sort of a bridge over to mineral, which is where inevitably headed. And in that we got to talk about a lot more about plant salts, because in Prima we talk a lot about plants. We're working primarily with plants. You start with plants. So in that, the salts are somewhat of a mystery. We're talking a lot about the mercury and the soul of the plants that we're working with, and the intelligence of them and things like that, and to distill them and to do these things. But the mercury, or the I'm sorry, the mineral aspect of it is something that requires a lot more attention. And in Secunda we talk about that a little bit more. And my wife, Katamara Rosarium, she's on the board of directors for the Spagyricus Institute, which Robert talks on, and we're very involved with them. And they're much loved people in our lives, and I highly recommend everyone check out the Spagyricus Institute. It's wonderful. And Robert's work is just, I think, some of the best. And so I'm taking the class. We're doing lab work, and we're talking about the crystallization of plant minerals during a specific election, planetary election, astrological election. And so he had with him like a glass beaker, kind of like this, and it's just full of a liquid, clear, slightly opaque liquid. And this was a super saturation of plant salts of a particular plant that he had distilled and then uh, calcined down to and leached the mineral salts out of, and then super saturated it into a solution inside of a jar. So he takes this jar, and this was a plant that was ruled by Jupiter, and he wanted to he was waiting for a really good Jupiter election in order to crystallize these plant salts, because they're in a solution. They're a liquid, right? So he wanted to demonstrate to us the process of doing that, and so he popped them, just like I'm sure you guys have had those. They're like pocket heaters, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Those little pocket heaters, this plastic containers that
Yep.
have the liquid, and you bend a little piece of zinc inside, and it creates a like a thermogenic reaction that crystallizes the entire pack, and that thermogenic reaction is like warm, and it gets hot, and it warms your pants pocket, right? Yeah. So this same sort of thing happens in this jar, right? As soon as he hit it, that was so saturated with minerals that friction created that thermogenic reaction, and they all started to crystallize at that point and become a solid, right? So when that became a solid, he explained to us that the astrological influences at that specific time were now then locked. Like it was like analogous to the birth date of like you, right? Like what's your birthday? Darren, what's your birthday?
Mine's
March 10th, 1981. Don't steal my identity.
March 10th,
please.
1981.
I should
I won't. Do you remember the time? Do you know the time?
I think it was around 10 after 8 in the morning.
All right. 10 or 8 in the morning. So if we
10
were to
after
do
8,
this
10
at
after
that
8.
time, right? 10 after 8. All right. So if we were to do that at 10 after 8 at that same time, then that would sort of be like the birth date. Like this thing that is receptive and responsive, like it's in a liquid state. Liquid is very receptive, right? It's not fixed. It's open. It's receptive. When you crystallize it, it becomes solid. Solid things aren't very receptive, right? Like we tell people that are concrete, they're not very receptive, right? So now this thing is crystallized. It's become a solid crystal, and you could see, like in the jar, the crystals are spreading, and it becomes one big solid mass, and you can actually see it in your eyes. Like here it is. Like here's a liquid that has now become a solid. So I'm taking these blacksmithing classes at the same time, and I'm trying to, the entire time I'm studying blacksmithing, I'm trying to understand the traditional grimoire practices. Because if you look at these grimoire practices, they talk about a quench and quenching during specific astrological times in particular liquids. Darren, you got a question?
So would just like water freeze into ice, is that the same sort of crystallization process?
It's very similar. Yes. Yes. You can create that crystallization process of minerals under cold. Definitely. Yeah. It just depends on the chemical that we're talking about, for sure. But it's not going to stay crystallized, right? Unless the temperature is the same. And that's the same with steel, right? Like if you change the temperature of steel, it's no longer crystallized, right? It's in a semi-liquid state. And that's what clicked, is that when you heat steel, it becomes malleable. And when it becomes malleable, it's also in a semi-liquid state, and it becomes receptive, just like water, right? Like a liquid. So what I realized is that the quenching and the time in which it's quenched, which is your hardening, when you harden steel, you're locking in the astrological times, and what you quench them in, you're also locking those virtues of the thing that you're quenching them in within the steel. So then, or whatever metal that you're working with. And so those virtues are now part of the metal, and the astrological time, those astrological influences, or the light from the primordial source that gets transmitted through the different planets, because that's how it was viewed in Hermetic philosophy, is now locked within that, and those have specific virtues as well. And so the sorcery of this is like working with those different correspondences and those different virtues in order to cause specific effects. And that is in essence sort of the sorcery of blacksmithing from the alchemical philosophy. But this is also something that goes deeper into Eu- European folk traditions and probably way more ancient than that. Like Paracelsus was making the trident of Paracelsus that all these different occult traditions talk about from thrown horseshoes. Like traditionally, that's what it talks about, and he tells you how to make it from that, and that's old Germanic and also pan-European lore. Like the power of the thrown horseshoe is huge. I mean, rednecks know this shit. Like to this day, a thrown horseshoe's got luck to it. So Paracelsus was working from the same standpoint, uh, which is interesting. So there's a intersection of folk magic within alchemical that sort of inspires some alchemical thought that a lot of people don't recognize.
Well, that's a good place for, I guess, for me to ask a couple questions. So can you talk a little bit more about your process of using this? I mean, I kind of sense that there might be it might be tough to schedule this, schedule your work around literally like, the alignment of the stars. I mean, it is interesting that they really relied on the stars so much back then. I mean, there seemed to be, it was accepted that the stars have an influence on things. I guess that's sort of
Mhm.
gone now in mainstream science and all that. But even like,
And the days and things like that, and different cultures had different perspectives on things. Like like in Scandinavian traditions within trolldom, if you look at old almanacs, actually, if you were to look at old American almanacs, some of that folklore definitely from either an astrological or a folk astronomical or astrological like standpoint. And that's something that really will be coming up a lot more, I suspect, in the next 10 years. I think younger people will start looking at that and questioning a lot of Western astrology and looking at different cultures' perspectives on astrology that were maybe counter to that, and questioning whether or not there needs to be like this one big giant homogenized astrology. Um, because if you look at some Scandinavian trolldom practices that like moved on into different perspectives, like things that were done on a Thursday were associated with Thor, which is a Jupiter day. And once again, lightning, there's an association between the two. And of course, there's a historical aspect of that. And so like, I don't do everything from that unless I do. Like I look at all these different things, and I know um, that it depends on what language I'm speaking. If I'm going to tell you a joke in Argentinian, like, or in Spanish, uh, but with an Argentinian, slant, it might only make sense to you if you're Argentinian.
yeah,
Uh,
right.
and so I think that sometimes with folk magic and with different magical practices, it really helps to understand the language and the context in which these things are done. So, like something done on a Monday is doomed for failure within Scandinavian trolldom. It's just not a good day to start anything. But from
And
a alchemical standpoint, like, well, it would be good to start things during for lunar stuff because it's the moon. It's ruled by the moon. That's the day of the moon. So you would do things done on that day. But for magical things or things that you want charged or to like happen that you really want to have happen, like you would do on, you know,
I
Thursday.
don't know. Thursday, that's the day. So today.
Thursday. 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 Thursday is Thursday, right? So for me, I get sort of like, how like people are speaking and when they're bilingual and they mix their language up, and like and it starts to not even make sense to them sometimes. Like where they're confusing their words. Like for me, my constant confusion is like because Thor being, like this blacksmith or it, some perspectives is that he had a blacksmith perspective, like or aspect. Some don't think that he is. But from my perspective, he has a blacksmith aspect. Though he didn't forge his own hammer, but he's still associated with blacksmiths and with the forge and with the hammer and things like that. So Thursday I associate with blacksmithing, but I also associate Tuesday with blacksmithing, right? Because Tuesday is the day ruled by Mars, right? So you have these competing things
Interesting. Yeah,
like in your
interesting.
mind when you are working from cross-cultural perspectives. There are commonalities and there's similarities, but you sort of have to switch between the two, and sometimes it becomes natural and you're just like, ah, well, yes, of course, that makes sense, and some of it's just intuitive and you're just feeling it, and I prefer that. But I think that perspective for people that are very stringent with the astrological days and timing and things like that, like, and it has to be very pristine and focused with timing. I think that in the next 10 years we're going to see a lot of questioning of that. I think that people will be like really a little bit more curious about different cultures' perspectives on time
Yeah. Yeah.
and the stars and how we navigate through this universe, like on Earth. So yeah, especially in terms of magical practices.
So I got a question here. How much intention or
All
what
right.
do you use any other influences like music or intention or meditation in your practice? I mean, and didn't the ancients say that alchemy couldn't really be practiced even in the lab without proper intention?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you're going to be influenced one way or the another, or another, by the processes that are happening. Um, with me, like coming from alchemy and then working with steel primarily, um, I'm a very martial dude. I spend quite a bit, and I do pay attention to the days of the week and the different influences and the astrological influences while that's happening. But I primarily work with steel, and I do pay attention. I think that meditation. I think meditation practice um, is, if you start it young and you're working um, young, to train your mind and to train your senses to pay attention, to cultivate awareness. That's something that sticks with you. It's like riding a bicycle, and it just accumulates and gets stronger over time. And I don't think that there's anything that you can do to change that over time. And so you're always going to be cultivating awareness. If you've really worked and focused on that and spent and dedicated and committed yourself to doing that, it will just inevitably happen. But you don't have to make it formal after a certain period. And if you do, I think you're missing the point a little bit.
Yeah.
And so um, for me, I spent so much time in my youth focusing and disciplining myself on that. I mean, I shaved my head every day. I I did a vow of poverty and lived on the streets and just you know, meditated on the sidewalk, like for years. And I committed myself to cultivating awareness and meditating. And I feel that I have that today, and I pay attention. And I see these different influences throughout the day, and I pay attention to them a great deal. Um, so, working with steel, working with iron, like I said, I approach things because I'm just so in it all the time. I have to think, it's influencing me greatly. And so I tend to stay in a very Mars focused space all the time. And it becomes sort of rumination on Mars and martial things. You ruminate on it. Past slights, things that piss you off, things like that. Mars is very interesting. My wife, if she was here right now, and I'm sure she's in the other room listening and scoffing at everything I say. She and I, we share a lab, though it's mostly hers now, as my forge is in a different location from our home, and I don't have the time to dedicate to lab work as much as I used to. I was trying to make another batch of oil of Mars, oil of iron, and I had just gotten this new burner that it's from China, and they're all a little bit different and a little bit wonky, and it's just at that level below the counter and angled it just the right way that I couldn't read it, and the other ones were backwards, the ones that I'm typically using, and I turned on, instead of the magnetic stir strip, I turned on the heat full blast. So I have all this red ochre in my flask with a bunch of Everclear, mind you. All right, so Everclear, and the ochre, the red ochre, which is like iron oxide, is thick. I poured it on. I was gonna make a big batch, right? Dumped an entire liter of Everclear in there, and just I was going big on this one. I really wanted to make a lot of it, which I'm glad, people people I'm sorry, people look at me and think that I'm a meathead, like blacksmith who worships Thor or something, and that I'm not, a thinking man, so they don't buy my alchemy work. So the lab alchemy, and this is probably not a really good way to advertise it, but so I throw this together, and I'm busy. I'm working in the forge at the same time. I'm making this knife, and it's doing a bunch of Damascus, and it's a time sensitive sort of situation. So I'm running back and forth from the lab to my shop while doing it. The total definition of too many irons in the fire, right? So I turn on what I think is a magnetic like a spinning bar, and then go out to my forge. I'm done. I don't have anything left to do. It just has to stir. It just has to stir, and that's it. I'm good. Go back out to the forge, go to work. Working. All of a sudden, my wife comes out, just this pale look of concern and panic on her face. There's been an explosion in the lab. Which no one ever wants to hear that. No one that does lab work ever wants to hear that. And so, I mean, I almost evacuate my bowels. I'm very oh shit, what's going on? She's like, I can't explain it. You got to come and see. And I'm expecting the worst. And it was pretty bad, but it wasn't an explosion with fire and horrible things happening. It was an explosion of red ochre everywhere, iron oxide everywhere, everywhere. That thing, it just created a bunch of gas, and it exploded. Those from when you're a kid, right? It just everywhere, all over our lab, which was painted this beautiful color, and it was just very nice and pristine, just covered in red ochre. And there was on the roof, the ceiling above it, what looked like the planet Mars. It
No
was
way.
just magnificent. This magnificent, and we we didn't take any pictures of it, but we just started cleaning. And I really wish both of us do that, because this it's just too much, it was just so crazy to like see this giant round planet, this red planet of Mars on our ceiling. Just crazy. So nuts. And I mean, it's exactly that red ochre is the exact color of the planet Mars. Like it's just what you see when you see things on the Mars River. It's amazing. Yes.
Is that what prompted you to move your workshop a little bit farther away from the lab?
No. No, that was out of necessity. I outgrew my shop. My shop originally, I started in just a woodshed.
Yeah.
I was not expecting to really get as into blacksmithing as I did, and yeah, I outgrew my space and needed to rent a place. So now I rent a place on the other side of town, and it's suiting all my needs at the moment. Though, of course, I'd love a big giant warehouse space, but what can you do?
Well, yeah, I mean, one day maybe,
Yeah,
let's show some of
someday.
your stuff here. Let's show some of your stuff here. This is your Instagram page.
Mhm.
I think Darren really loves knives, and he's a steel worker too, so he'll appreciate.
Oh,
some of-
cool, man.
I'm not a steel worker. Like I don't make knives and stuff. I have a guy. Shout out to Steve Lynch. Makes my knives. He made me like a tomahawk, and he's making me some sort of a sword right now. And he made me like a cleaver and a skinning knife and a deboning knife and
What kind of metal work do you do, Darren?
like construction.
He's
Like,
he's
Construction?
an
All
iron
right.
worker, but welder, iron worker.
Yeah,
But
yeah. That's you got to know a lot, and that's an amazing art form in its own right. Architectural steel, especially.
so I mean, these are amazing pieces. I mean, it's
Thank
yeah,
you.
it's incredible.
I did those. I did those for a Sufi practitioner who, honestly, I kind of want to say this because I've been thinking a lot about it lately, and I especially really thought about it a lot after meeting him in person. That and looking at some of his work over the years, and talking to him personally, that the Sufi traditions and Arabic traditions are a lot of what we get Western occultism from. And a lot of people want to say, no, it's from the Greeks. Yeah, the goes, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. Uh, a lot of it, like it's from either um, Arabic or Hebrew traditions that we've horribly bastardized uh, because it was exotic, and we're always looking for some exotic other. Um, but
How far
I will.
back? How far back?
Well, I mean, the Picatrix, like is a huge influence, but I think it goes way back. I mean, we're.
Like after the
I
Dark
mean, you
Ages,
got to
kind of in the
think,
middle of
like the
the
Knights
Dark Ages.
Templar and all that stuff, where but like, yeah, yeah, and the Renaissance and things like that. But we were heavily influenced by uh, Middle Eastern and Arabic practices. We just we don't acknowledge it. And if you look at these practitioners, and there's not a lot of these, there's not a lot of translations of these practices, and there's not a lot of open practitioners in Arabic culture because it's considered very serious. You can do terrible things with this sorcery, and so uh, people are penalized for doing terrible things, just like in every culture, and uh, it's very feared because of the seriousness of it. And you'll actually find that in a lot of different cultures that still acknowledge magic as legitimate, is that prayer and healing and protection and things like that are considered good forms of magic, but everything else is considered sort of bad and manipulative and terrible to behold, because it is primarily it is. So when you look at these practices, like some of them are pretty heinous, and if you read the Picatrix, you can you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, an oracular skull. For God's sakes, an oracular skull was created by putting a man in a barrel up to his neck. Imagine being in a barrel up to your neck with a big wooden hole over the top of the barrel, and the barrel is filled with sesame oil. And then you're just left there to starve to death and rot until your head just sort of like separates from the body. Okay. And then that skull, that head, is then used for doing divination work.
Wow.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal stuff. I really want there to be more and that's it's very dramatic. There's a lot of non-horrific things, and I don't want to misrepresent Arabic culture by and Middle Eastern culture by just talking about just the horrible stuff. But there's some really cool there's some really cool stuff within that you can obviously start to see heavily inspired and influenced a lot of Solomonic magic, and they're still doing it, and they're still doing it from a perspective that is way more advanced, way more informed. I mean, alchemy itself had its heyday in the Middle East. I mean, alchemy itself, like Egypt, I mean, come on. I mean, these are deep, deep influences on the Western tradition that we have been really ignoring. And the problem is, as well, is that a lot of these old books, there are people that almost like an inquisition sort of thing, even today, they want to destroy these books. They want to destroy that information. They don't want it out there. And that's still happening now within Arabic culture.
Wow. I wanted to ask you kind of about that along the same vein is how is occultism misperceived right now, like the real occultism, not like the black magic or the the darkness, like the evil they say occultism is these days, but occultism as in probably how you define it, hidden. How is that
Right.
misperceived these days,
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the church and with the media, right? Whether it's rock and roll, heavy metal, or movies, TV shows, things like that. Like they've sort of followed a narrative of like making.
satanic symbolism?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the satanic panic just like kept rolling, like within the media and stuff like that. I mean, I grew up within the satanic panic era, like I grew up with Bob Larson. I was on a fucking radio DJ uh thing with Bob Larson once, and I wasn't allowed to talk to him. Like they didn't connect us. I was so pissed. I had so much to say to that asshole. Oh my god. But like that whole thing uh of like we exotic we make exotic that which we fear. We make other that which we fear, right? That which we fear is other. And excuse me. And so there's all this stuff within our own traditions and our own heritage that we wanted to make go away. So we make it fearful. We make it other. We make it bad. And we've been doing this for a long time, like the witchcraft narrative that we buy into today, a lot of that came from demonizing Gnostics and the Jews in Spain and throughout Europe, like so the church could, basically take over their resources and dominate the territory, both politically and economically. I mean, this is well known history. Like we did this, like whether it was the Cathars or the Jews, and we did this. This happened. Yes, yeah.
Well, it seems like it's ramping up now, though, too. I mean, it seems like now New Age. I mean, there's a whole sort of movement about demonizing New Age, witchcraft, like traditional occultism nowadays. Let's call it like just whatever, esoteric studies, witchcraft, anything kind of New Agey now seems to be getting demonized as well. There's a whole kind of movement that's all.
Well, the New Age itself actually bought into the exact same narrative of that they used back in, ancient Europe and Spain. They have, and they still are. The QAnon New Agers especially are still doing that. Like they're uh, the most common thing. This is an old libel, like the old blood libel, like thing that were used to demonize the Jews, is like they're going to kill and eat your children, right? They're going to sacrifice your kids, right? We saw that with Pizzagate. We saw that with all these different conspiracy theory things. Like they're going to kill and eat your children, right? Or they're going to be they're pedophiles, or they're going to do something to your kids, right? They're coming after your children in one way, shape, or form. Then we saw that again with the Satanic Panic. And then now the New Agers have adopted that as well. And they're using that. I mean, my God, I see so many New Age people adopting these same blood libel concepts, most of them super anti-Semitic, which is just mind-blowing to me, mind-blowing. And they parrot these things over and over again, and it blows my mind. And so, are people going after the New Agers? Yeah, but the people that are going after the New Agers are usually on the same side as the New Agers. Like, I mean, it's kind of mind blowing to me, politically and socially. Like,
Yeah, that's
I,
that's kind of what I was getting at. It seems like there's a bit of a shift towards Christ again, maybe because of this overt symbolism that's happening, and a lot of that sort of like I feel like that movement is kind of looking at New Age in the same light as like black magic, or like they're just lumping, like it almost reminds me of the burnings of the witches and stuff, or the Malleus Maleficarum, where they're like all these things outside of the traditional Christianity are considered witchcraft. It's crazy.
well, I mean, those were social political like tools that were used, to try to um, gain power. Just they're ruses, and they're just used to gain power. And people have like reinvented and used the same narratives over and over again since time immemorial. The biggest irony, the most horrible thing, is that the Romans, the pagan Romans, used that same thing against the Christians when the Christian cults started. I mean, that's the brutal irony of it all. Like, this narrative has been used over and over and over again to seize power, to keep small groups small, and to keep them from taking over the dominant political structure, social structure. Um, it's used to relegate and maintain power within belief systems, and it's you learn about it, and you're just like, from like way back, you can start saying like this is just a repeating pattern. They just keep reinventing the same story over and over and over again, and yeah, it's mind blowing. The sad
Is it
thing
is
is
it
that New Age stuff is tragic. It's absolutely tragic.
is it
What's that? I'm
inevitable, or
sorry.
is it done? Is it inevitable? Is it just part of our cyclical sort of evolution, our social evolution, or is it sort of intentional every time?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, it's intentional and unintentional, like depending on who's participating in it. Like it's
Yeah.
definitely intentionally thrown out there by some people, but I mean, it's unintentionally, you know, done by people that are passing that on. It's like a sort of trickle down sort of
Yeah.
uh, form of hearsay and conspiracy, so to speak. I'm not really big into conspiracy stuff. I'm a massive critic of conspiracy theory and things like that. But what I see is that are happening with it that limit our growth as a species, and I'm seeing a lot of it, especially right now with the internet making it so easy for
Yeah.
people to spread
Yeah.
information like
Yeah.
across the globe.
Yeah.
So like with alchemy, as well as with like blacksmithing, with my work, I see a lot of people just take my work and replicate it or try to imitate it without understanding it. With alchemy, I see the same thing. There's a blacksmith up in Canada who, as soon as I started doing my quenches and things like that, he saw that there were people that were wanting to, buy my work, and he was kind of a jerk and decided to replicate some of my stuff, and he started doing it in like moon water and different things that are quartz crystal water, things that went against the philosophy of alchemy, and that were like more new age. And my critique of the new age stuff is that it has no foundation in philosophy. It has no actual solid foundation at all. It's just cherry picked, foundationless belief that a toddler could come up with. It has no actual foundation in anything. People try to like, I guess loosely, adapt it to sort of pseudoscience of like scientific materialism with energy, vibration, and frequency and things like that. But it's still so loosey goosey. You can just apply it, so oblique. You can apply anything to it that just fits your narrative, like whatever it is. You can just like throw whatever you want in. So it's ripe for cherry picking, uh, and but it has no real philosophical foundation to it, which is what uh, Hermeticism has. Like,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
like to, or any of these different folk traditions. They've got cultural, like philosophical foundations within them that are really deep, and the deeper you study them, the deeper they go, and it's kind of amazing. I love that one. I love the fire.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That was a great project. So
Can you,
yeah, um, you see this within alchemy too. There's a lot of people that try to jailbreak alchemy, and they try to adapt scientific materialism to that, so that it's not. Um, they use New Age philosophy instead of Hermetic philosophy, and what they end up doing is bastardizing the work itself, and what that allows them to do is pretty much anything they want. So they can sell you anything they want. They're just playing off your ignorance.
so what do
They
you
can
mean
do
by
things as poorly as possible. They can sell you poison.
playing it off scientific materialism?
So so Hermetic philosophy has a strong foundation in the ontological system of Neoplatonism, right? Scientific materialism goes in a very different direction than Neoplatonism. And and we've been trying to catch up to Neoplatonism and trying to explain Neoplatonism with scientific materialism ever since. Paranormal psychology does that. Like that's all they do, right? They're trying to explain how they lost their soul to scientific materialism through paranormal psychology. And that's my hot take on paranormal psychology. But so is transpersonal psychology. That's exactly what transpersonal psychology and consciousness theory and um, scientific materialism came in and sort of like, well, there's actually no real basis for the soul. There's a basis for mind, and we're still trying to understand that. But like an immortal soul doesn't really, we have energy. Energy cannot be created and destroyed. We apply scientific principles of physics and things like that to it, but we don't really have like an explanation of like, where the fuck is a soul? How do I get there? and where is it? What does it feel like? What's it smell like? Things like that. Like we're very materialist. Like with our approach with
yeah.
that, and so we don't really have like a standpoint for that. So what we do is we create within New Age philosophy, we create a bunch of really oblique bullshit pseudoscience ways
quantum
of
mechanic
talking
type
about it
stuff.
all so that we can justify any whim that we have while
So-
stoned out of our mind, like sitting on the toilet with New Age philosophy, because we
So
can
where
do
does
that.
where does
With
Scandi
New Age
folk?
philosophy, we can utilize very loose scientific terminology to explain anything.
Yeah. Oh, he's frozen. No,
Vaccinate
you're
the whole
back.
planet.
You're back. So so where does Scandi folk magic sit on that issue?
I've lost you.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. Okay. Where
Yeah,
does
thank
Scandi
Like
folk
slow
magic
motion.
fit on that?
Ooh,
Can you hear me now? Oh, it's a bad delay. You can't hear us, eh?
All right, repeat your question.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, where does Scandi folk magic
So is your
sit on all
question, where
that?
does Scandinavian folk magic fall into this?
Yeah. Oh no, where does it sit on like from Neoplatonism to the materialism and the soul?
Things are still pretty rough in internet land. We're having some technical difficulties here.
well, at least we made it to the 56 minutes. At the beginning, it didn't seem like we were going to
did.
make it anywhere. And so at least we got
I
the
know.
hour in. Is there anything that you feel like we
I
didn't
am going to
get
say
to?
I can say this with the Scandinavian folk magic concept is that philosophically speaking, we get very complex when we start to look at specific cultures and how they historically. My background is in anthropology. I've got a degree in transpersonal anthropology, which is studying specific cultures and their belief systems. So the Scandinavian people were very, very some of the last people to sort of get Christianized in, like Northern Europe. And they sort of adapted their belief systems to a Neoplatonism, right? That was brought by the church. And studying how they believed prior to that, it's not very well documented, but you can start to sort of see like where a lot of this stuff comes from. And you can start to see there's certain scholars like Claude Lacatois, like he's one of my favorites. He wrote a lot about like the pre-Christian uh, metaphysics of Europeans, and I think that anyone that really wants to dive headfirst into that conversation would do a good job looking at that, but also to study how Christianity started to influence your pan-European thought after it spread. So something to look at.
Do you think we forgot anything, or do you want to say anything before we wrap it up?
No, I do want to make a shout out to the Viridis Genii Symposium, which is something that my wife is the head of, and I just support and help do minimally. But the Viridis Genii Symposium is a conference, and the Viridis Genii book is a book that we publish and work on together though she does most of the work. And it's wonderful. It pulls together authors and researchers and practitioners from around the world that are focused on plant magic, alchemy, plant mysticism, and things like that. And that the plant world, it just like in alchemy, that's what you start with. That's what you want to start with. That's what you want to learn first. And a lot of people don't. So something to pay attention to and keep your eye on is the work that we're doing there. So VridisGNI.com, and we do this event every summer, and we publish a book. We've got multiple books. We even started our own publishing company to self-publish the book series, and it's definitely something to check out. So definitely check that out.
Right on. What about your where you can find your blacksmithing?
Check out my Instagram, Cunning Forge. That's where I post everything. I post it on Twitter and Threads and Facebook and things like that. And my, of course, my Etsy page. But Etsy has been a little problematic for a lot of people in the last couple of years. So if there's something you see that I post that you like, feel free to message me because it's all for sale. Everything I do. So I'm not doing custom work anymore or reproduction work. I just make what I love and offer that to people. So
Right on.
check me
Thanks,
out there.
buddy. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Right on.
been
Thank
great.
you,
Okay.
Troll, for
We'll put links
coming on the
below.
show.
Yeah.
Have a good time. Come
Yeah.
back anytime.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Right on. Take care.
And that was a chat with Troll Cunning.
Marcus McCoy, Troll Cunning
McCoy.
Forge. And I wanted to ask him about why he named it.
Top. Sorry, I was like, fuck. I know I seen the name somewhere. Troll Cunning Forge.
I wanted to ask him about that name next time because I got more questions. I want to ask him about the gold, working with gold and bronze and yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Working with the bronze, the gold.
Yeah, it's good.
Big thanks to Marcus McCoy for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you're one of our supporters. One of the 1% supports the work, the magnum opus. Head over to Grimericans.ca/support today. If you want to join the ranks, help us out. You can make a one-time donation. You can sign up for monthly, whatever you want to do. You can also head over to GrimericaOutlaw.ca if you want to check out our conspiracy podcast. And you can head over to adultbrain.ca if you want to check out that podcast as well. The brand new audiobook podcast where we're going to try a different way of doing audiobooks, where you get a bunch of free content, free books every month, and you can be a member if you want. All that great stuff. Adultbrain.ca, GrimericaOutlaw.ca, Grimerica.ca/support. I know it's a lot, and you should check out Marcus's stuff too. Busy little list for you. It's all in the show notes. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.